I grew up in the goldfields of West Australia in a town called Leonora. Most people know Kalgoorlie, so Leonora is about 200 kilometres north of that. So Leonora started as a mining town for the nearby mine site, of course, but by the time the 1980s came around, that mine had failed. So the town had just become like a truck stop for the big freight haulers throughout the region. So the only main features of Leonora were 2 petrol stations, 2 pubs, and a post office that doubled as the video store. So you would have Sean Connery as James Bond looking down on you when you grabbed your mail. So it was a wild little place. The fun part about growing up in a little speck of dust town in the 80s is that we went full 80s. So as kids, we'd get together on the weekends and we'd be in bright fluoro shirts, like hot green, hot pink. We'd have the giant yellow stack hats you may remember, and we'd get together on our BMX bikes and just rove around all day in the red dirt like bandits. But Leonora being the size that it was, that we ran out of places to roam pretty quick. So you'd head out of town and would find all these abandoned mine shafts. And would be crawling around in there in the dark, in the spider webs. Probably very dangerous, not most advised, but we had a great deal of fun. We felt like Indiana Jones out there. So that was the good part about growing up in Leonora in the 80s. The bad part would be when my dad would come back to town. So my dad worked as a subcontractor on the mine sites. So he didn't work in the pit itself. He would actually develop the villages and the facilities around it. So he could build anything with his hands. So it was often in demand out there. So the pattern would be, he would be out at a site for 1 week, 2 weeks, and then he'd come back for a weekend, maybe like a whole week. So my memory of my dad as a kid was this like tall, lean, that angry man. So he'd often just be this flannel shirt embodiment of rage. So it was difficult to be around, but as a kid, you just want to hang out with your dad, and I think that's just dad's, right? And because he could build anything with his hands, I'd often ask him to build things with me, like, let's make a tree fort, let's make a wooden sword and shield. So he would often say yes, but it would never actually happen. So instead, though, he'd send me up on rooftops, so I was small and I could climb easily, and I'd be taking apart air conditioning units. Or he'd put me in the back of a ute with a shovel and would go out to a mine site, and I'd help clear the ground for a demountable to come in. So as a kid, once again, I don't know, you just go with it, you want to hang out, you want to be helpful. But at the same time, I was just a kid, so I didn't really know how to do things, so if I'm 7 or 8. And my dad didn't want to explain how to do things. He would just tell you to do it and then expect it to be done right. So an example of this would be we're in his workshop, and he hands me a metal pipe with a mark on it, and he tells me, cut this in half, and then he leaves. And so I look around, and the only thing I can find is a wooden lumber saw. So I take that, and I go to work on it, and it goes as well as you can imagine, like absolutely mangled it. So I've got this pipe, and he eventually comes back in, and he looks at the pipe, and it's in pieces, and he just loses his shit at me. He just loses his temper and goes mad. So you can tell from there, it became very important for me to be very small, to be very quiet, to try and not upset him. But the idea was, I thought if I could keep trying and get it right, maybe eventually he would like me, right? So another example would be when I was 8. So we're in the workshop still, and we're working on some plumbing. So we're putting this PVC piping together with this bright blue glue. It smells really bad. And suddenly he turns to me and he goes, get me a right-angled edge. And I'm just like, what is a right-angled edge? In my head, I'm freaking out because I don't know what this is. But the quickest way to get in trouble with my dad would be to ask him. So we can't do that. And I figure if I can just go and figure it out, I'll get it right, and then maybe he'll like me. It'll be great, right? So I head out of the workshop and I go around the side to the shed where we keep all our miscellaneous tools, our miscellaneous parts. And I'm trawling through this bucket of PVC pipe fittings. And I'm just starting to panic. I'm like, what do I do? Which one is it? Is it this one? Is it this one? I just didn't know. And all of a sudden I grab a piece, and it was the shape of like a lowercase r. And I'm like, all right, this has to be it. All right, got it. So I put it under my arm. I wander back into the workshop, and I stand quietly next to him until he notices me. And then he looks at me, and he puts out his hand for the piece, and I place it in there. And then he takes it, and he just slowly looks at it, and he puts out this big sigh. And then he says to me, I always knew you were useless. And then he takes it and throws it in the corner. And so as I stood there, I was just stunned. You can imagine it. Just like I had no words, and I felt like my whole body was tingling, right? And for him, though, he'd gone back to his workshop bench. So for him, it was just another moment, just working away. But for me, something really shifted in that moment. And I think the thought was that I realized that my dad's love was unobtainable, at least for me, right? And even though I was 8 then, and I didn't have all the words for it yet, I think the other thought that happened as well was that there's no point chasing love from those that don't want to give it, right? And that thought, though, it would take a couple of decades to actualize, to get going, but with a lot of time, so I lost my way in my teenage years, got in a lot of trouble into the 20s as well, but with a lot of time and work, I realized that voice in my head, so my dad's voice, had no place defining me. And then after that, all of a sudden, I started changing from someone who was a high school dropout to someone who now has a university degree. I went from someone, thank you. Thank you. I went from someone who wore steel caps and got sweaty all day to someone who wears like an office work costume and gets a sore back from sitting at a computer. All of which is to say, I got further and further away from who my dad was, which is a good thing because I went from someone that didn't feel like they deserved love to someone that is now surrounded by warm and wonderful people that share with me their love and they share with me their kindness. And so now I'm the sort of person that can turn to my best friend and go, I knew you were always amazing. And that's something I think we all need to hear, whether you're 8 or 40. Thank you.